It's draft week. You're listening to another episode of the Wildcast podcast. I'm Justin Spears, Arizona football writer, here with senior writer and columnist Michael Lev. We'll be talking nothing but NFL draft for the entirety of the podcast. One of my favorite podcasts that we do every single year. I love draft week. This is the time of year where all of us football nerds kind of come together and geek out over the next wave of incredible prospects that are coming to the NFL. And well, Lev, in years past, at least in recent years since I've been working at the Star, our draft conversation is mostly about the guys who are not playing for Arizona. But this year for Arizona, the NFL draft means something. You got not just Jordan Morgan potentially going in the first round. He's certainly going to go in the second. I can't imagine him falling any farther than that. But then you also have Jacob Cowing at wide receiver, running back Michael Wiley, tight end Tanner McLachlan, and some other guys who could potentially hear their names called. And it's just crazy to me that for the first time in a while, the NFL draft is a big deal in Tucson, Arizona.
Plot twist, right? Arizona is relevant and involved in the NFL draft again, which is a great development for us, for the program itself. I've written about this several times that it kind of feeds onto itself, right? Like the more players that you can put into the league, the more likely you are to get NFL caliber players to come to your school, right? Because you can talk all you want about NIL, this, that, and the other. The bottom line is every kid who is a scholarship player coming out of high school into college, their dream is to play in the NFL. And they want to know, can I go to a program that's going to develop me and put me in a position to make it to the league?
Yeah.
And for the longest time, Arizona just failed in that regard, point blank.
Yep.
Like they just did not produce NFL players. Sometimes they wouldn't have anyone drafted in a given year. At best, you're talking 5th, 6th, 7th round picks. Now we're looking at maybe a first rounder in Jordan Morgan, as many as 4, maybe 5 guys who could be selected over the course of the 3 days. And then next year, Tetairoa McMillan, probably a top half of the first round, maybe even higher than that. Jonas Savaiinaea certainly looks like an NFL player. I think Traden Stukes is going to surprise a lot of people when it comes to draft season next year. It's going to put his name on the map. So kudos to the previous staff for developing those players. Hey, kudos to even the staff before that for bringing in Jordan Morgan and Michael Wiley, those were Sumlin guys.
Mm-hmm.
He did recognize talent in those particular players, and then Jed Fish and his staff kind of took them to the next level. And now it's going to be incumbent upon Brent Brennan and his staff to show that they can do the same thing.
Later on in the podcast, we're also going to talk about other prospects as well from the Pac-12, including the quarterbacks. Lots of great quarterbacks, even guys who are not in the Pac-12, but played in the Pac-12, like a Jaden Daniels. We'll have more on that at the end of the podcast. But before we get into more of Jordan Morgan, just want to give a huge shout out to our crew here on Tucson.com and the Arizona Daily Star. Lots of things happening right now in Tucson. You got Arizona baseball, you got Arizona softball, the Tucson Roadrunners, and the murkiness of their future. And they also have their postseason stretch starting on Wednesday. Lots of things happening in Tucson, Arizona. And Lev, how about that? Arizona baseball and softball winning in walk-off fashion over this past weekend.
They both had 2 walk-offs out of 3
sweeps.
games in sweeps over the weekend, which is incredible. I actually went to the Roadrunners game on Saturday night as a fan. The last regular season game, probably in the history of the franchise here in Tucson. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it seems more likely than not that they'll move at this point. It's kind of interesting how this works in hockey. Like a bunch of really good players from the Coyotes have been, quote unquote, sent down because their season's over to play in the Calder Cup playoffs. So their reinforcements have arrived for the Roadrunners to maybe make a run here. So that'll be fun to watch how that plays out. I wrote a piece about the men's tennis program. That ran over the weekend about Clancy Shields. People want to check that one out.
Pac-12 champs.
Pac-12 champs for the
third
time in as many years. Yeah. Which, if you look at the history of Arizona men's tennis, especially before Clancy Shields got here, it's just an absolutely amazing turnaround. So I wrote about that and got a lot of cool stuff coming this week related to the draft in some form or fashion. So yeah, I love this week too, by the way, like you mentioned at the top. It's just so fun, so exciting. It's the best non-event event that we have in sports by far.
Yep. And it's kind of like a football heavy weekend this week, because not only do you have NFL draft, but you also have Arizona spring practices. There's a spring game on Saturday at 6:00. I think the Tucson Sugar Skulls are also in town too. So you have IFL, college, NFL draft going on. A lot of football talk in late April. Love to see
And
it.
thank the Lord that they put that spring game at 6:00. Right?
Not in
Because
the middle of the
we
afternoon.
could have several players drafted during the day on day 3.
Yep.
Out of Arizona, and that starts in the morning and it usually ends in mid-afternoon. So the timing should be just right. And also it's better for the fans to be in the shade with a night game. So that'll be fun. A lot of programs seem like they're moving toward playing their spring games under the lights, and especially here in Arizona, if you're going to have it in late April, you've got to have it at night.
So please go to Tucson.com for all your coverage. Also, please subscribe, rate, and comment the Wildcast podcast wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Lev. So we were just talking about Arizona prospects going into the draft. And of course, top dog is Jordan Morgan at left tackle. And, throughout the year, he was viewed as a first round pick, still viewed as a first round pick, depending on what mock draft that you look at. One guy who was really high on him throughout the course of the season was draft guru from ESPN, Mel Kiper Jr. He loved him some Jordan Morgan. Consistently throughout the year, had him as a late first rounder. The Dallas Cowboys have the number 24th pick. They could certainly use a left tackle after losing their star to, I believe, the New York Jets. I think Tyron Smith is with the Jets now, if I'm not mistaken. The Arizona Cardinals at pick number 27 could certainly use a left tackle. So there are some spots for Jordan Morgan, which we could see him go to. But unfortunate part about this draft is that it's loaded, not just offensive lineman, but specifically a tackle. And that's why a lot of people, including Mel Kiper Jr. right now, view Jordan Morgan more as a early second round pick, but a guy who will land no farther than, I would say, 38 to 40. Right now, Mel has Jordan Morgan going number 36 overall to the Washington Commanders. I've seen Jordan Morgan go from anywhere from 24 to 38. That's kind of Jordan Morgan's range, and that's when I expect him to get drafted.
Yeah, I think that 38 to 40 range is the absolute floor for him. As you mentioned, this is an unusual draft in that there are a ton of good offensive linemen in there. There are so many tackles in this draft, plus the fact that Jordan Morgan's arms did not quite measure up to what the NFL ideal is for a tackle, that they're talking about him as a guard, which I don't know. To me, when I watch Jordan Morgan move, I think it would be a crime to put him at guard. Like he is an elite athlete for someone who is 6'5" and 310 pounds. He can move in space. We've seen it a million times on screen passes, right? They'll throw those bubble screens, and it's Jordan Morgan's job to run that 10 yards or however long it is to pick off a defensive back or a linebacker, whoever is out there on the perimeter. And more often than not, he would get the job done. I see him as a tackle. I could see him slipping out of the first round because of just the supply and demand issues. And there's always, like, we'll get to this later, like if a quarterback slips, toward the, out of that top tier, teams usually like to trade up into the back end of the first round because then they get the 5th-year player option with a first round contract. So that can sometimes push really good players out of the first round into the second. But hey, man, there would be no shame at all in being an early second round pick. Wasn't Evan Britton, the guy you had on last week, the last Arizona lineman to be drafted? He was a second rounder, right?
Yeah, second rounder, 39.
Yeah. So I think somewhere right in that range be sort of poetic in some ways. I think Jordan Morgan's going to have a long and fruitful NFL career. He's someone who, if they're looking at him at guard, in some ways that's a good thing because that shows that he's got versatility.
Yeah.
Right. That he could maybe play multiple positions, even though he was left tackle and only left tackle here at Arizona. Good athlete, good worker, has those magic feet. that are it's just hard to find guys who are that big who can move as well as he can.
Well, he was a naturally, or still is a naturally gifted athlete. When he was in high school at Marana, Jordan's a little bit different than a lot of kids nowadays, right? Every single kid has a social media platform, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. They're all over the place when it comes to social media. And when Jordan was being recruited out of high school, I heard about this guy committing to Arizona out of Marana, this tackle. And I'm like, okay, let me find his Twitter account. Can't find it. Can't find him on Instagram. And I'm like, how do people know that he's committed? And he went 0 dark 30 on his social media accounts, just didn't have it, just because he's the kind of guy where he wants to stay as private as possible. He is a very reserved and also mature young man, kind of an old soul in a lot of ways. And to see that a 16, 17-year-old doesn't have social media and he committed because he called the coaching staff and told them, that to me made me an instant fan of Jordan Morgan. And then when I went out to go see him at Marana High School practice, he looked very, in as far as like a D1 lineman, looked very skinny. Like he still needed to put on some weight. He was right around 260-ish pounds, 270. So when he got to Arizona, he was very undersized for an offensive tackle. And every single year he put on weight, but made sure he put on good weight. There was never a moment in his time at Arizona where I thought, man, Jordan Morgan looks fat. He looks out of shape. He looks chubby, looks like he can't get the job done. He has always stayed in great shape, but slowly but surely packed on the necessary weight possible. Did he have an unblemished career at Arizona? No. He did struggle at times. But then in the last 2 years at Arizona, working with Brennan Carroll, overcoming the knee injury in 2022, he emerged and turned into this just great offensive tackle, the one that you want at the next level. Super athletic, big, can move. And you just look at the productions of you dive into his Pro Football Focus stats, the man doesn't give up a lot of sacks. When I was talking with, I think guys who work for the New York Giants, and they have their podcast radio set up, and they were talking to me about has Jordan Morgan ever struggled? Have you ever seen him just kind of get worked? And I'm like, he had a few hiccups against Laiatu Latu, but then you also have to remember it's Laiatu Latu. It's the best edge rusher perhaps in this year's NFL draft. So the man doesn't give up a ton of sacks, and he has everything you want in an offensive lineman. And I think that's why he's being talked about as one of the top tackles in the draft.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, the development path for Jordan, because I remember when I first started watching him, back in a little bit in 2020, 2021, I thought his instincts were kind of off. There'd be times when he'd be pulling out into space and he just wouldn't block anyone, he was just running to where they told him to run. And over the course of time, I think his feel for the game improved a lot. I give Brendan Carroll a lot of credit for coaching him up in that regard. And yeah, of course, there's going to be games where you give up a sack here and there, but I always go back to the Alamo Bowl, in which Jordan Morgan didn't play, as sort of the proof of how valuable he was.
You don't know what you got till it's gone.
Exactly. When he wasn't in there, oh boy, it was rough. You saw how valuable he was in his absence. And part of the Lost T-Mac tapes, the interview with Tetsuo McMillan that I wrote about a couple weeks ago before the Alamo Bowl, that no one ever really did anything with until I wrote about it several months later. He called him the MVP of the team, more even above himself, above Noah Fifita. And to hear another player say that kind of, unsolicited, that really said a lot to me too.
Mm-hmm. And now Jordan is prepared to make history. Like you said, Lev, the first offensive lineman drafted since Eben Britton in 2009. So 15 years ago.
I'm shaking my head, man.
15 years since Arizona.
Unbelievable. Yeah, no.
It's NFL draft pick at the offensive line position. So first offensive lineman since Eben Britton, could be the first first rounder period since Antoine Cason in
2008.
2008.
Yep.
If he's drafted in the first round, he's going to be the first Arizona offensive lineman in the first round since John Fina in 1992. So Jordan Morgan has a chance to make history. He will make history.
If he happens to go to the Cowboys or Cardinals, that is going to be the most popular NFL jersey in Tucson.
Jersey skills
either way.
Through the roof. And it's cool that in back-to-back drafts, you see Tucsonans get picked up. Bijan Robinson getting drafted last year too. So it's a good year, or a good couple years for Tucson and the Arizona Wildcats. And I was looking at like Wildcats taken in the NFL draft, Lev, and I'm like, I wonder when's the last time Arizona produced just a second round pick, right? Because we know Jordan's going to go in the second round. And the last second rounder was in 2011. It was Brooks Reed.
No, Brooks Reed. Okay.
2011. Yeah, Brooks Reed.
2011. Okay, Brooks Reed.
And 2009 was Evan Britton. And I'm
what
like,
was Nick Foles was the third rounder?
Nick Foles was the third rounder.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
In that same draft class. Yeah. So it's it's been a while since Arizona has produced day 1/day 2 guys.
Credit to, and this is going several coaching regimes back now, but credit to Mike Stoops, right? For recognizing NFL caliber players and bringing them in. We've talked about this many times, but Rich Rodriguez had a very specific like offensive system where he didn't need like NFL caliber athletes necessarily to produce, right?
Yeah.
To succeed in that system. And even if you look at the guys who were picked like from the Rich Rod era, they were mostly defensive players. You know, like there were never any offensive players picked off of Rich Rod teams. He had some back in the day at West Virginia, of course, and then I think maybe a couple from Michigan too. But systematically, he didn't need them, so he didn't necessarily go after them. Those were all Mike Stoops guys, right? And even the ones who maybe played for Rich Rod were still Mike Stoops recruits.
Yep. Yeah, I think he had like defensive linemen and linebackers and DBs. And it was so funny how like Rich Rod was this great offensive genius, but never produced any offensive NFL players. But speaking of offensive players, now moving on to Jacob Cowing, and Tanner McLachlan and Michael Wiley. Excuse me, those guys are viewed more as 3rd to 7th round picks. I would be shocked if any of those guys don't get drafted. Meaning, if they're signing with teams as undrafted free agents, maybe Michael Wiley I could see just because it's a running back.
That was the one I was going to mention. Yeah.
Okay. And he's
just
more
a supply and demand thing. And he is. I wrote about this I think in summer, but he's just perpetually underrated.
Yeah.
You know, he just doesn't look flashy. I mean, his 40 time was actually pretty good, 4.51. His 10-yard split was actually pretty good, 1.55. But he doesn't wow you with anything that he does. He just produces. He's a great pass catcher. Out of the backfield.
And that's why I think he will get drafted.
Yeah, that's his number one asset. So I think, to me, I would set the over/under at 3.5 for Arizona players, and Michael Wiley is the swing guy, whether it goes under or over. I think McLachlan's going to be the second guy off the board, Cowing third, and we'll get to that. We can get to that in a minute. Wiley, it's tough when you're a running back.
Yeah,
you know, it's just the game has changed. There's more good running backs than there are running back jobs available. You think let's just say that every college team has one good running back, right? That's like 130 guys. Yeah. And NFL teams, what do they use? Probably 2 guys. They might have 3 on the roster, you know? So that's 64 jobs or 96 jobs. And guys are coming out every year who are good. Mm-hmm. So it's really difficult at that position. So I think there's nothing to do with Michael Wiley's ability, his talent, his character. I think all of those things are, especially the latter, like it's very high marks, right? I think it's just supply and demand in the way the league is. That to me, I would lean toward him being a UDFA for those reasons.
But man, if you want to talk about a guy who deserves to be in the Ring of Honor, I mean, he won't be in the Ring of Honor, but man, what an incredible career for Michael Wiley. As a Kevin Sumlin guy, never left, kind of like Jordan Morgan, had every opportunity to leave, but didn't.
And also
hunkered
someone
down.
from Texas, you figure maybe he would just go play for Houston or
SMU,
or someone of that nature. Sure.
yeah, but stayed here and put together a very impressive career. And who's happy that Michael Wiley's no longer playing at Arizona? ASU fans. I'm sure they are tired of seeing him be so productive in that Territorial Cup game. I think, was it 8 or 10 total touchdowns during his entire career against ASU?
Michael Wiley scored a crap load of touchdowns during his time at Arizona.
Yeah.
He scored 28 TDs in 49 games, 24 starts, 16 as a rusher and 12 as a receiver.
Yeah.
And the latter, that is a high number. Like, he was so effective on the screen game this past year. They just set him up beautifully for those. He has a bit of a receiver background from high school. His brothers were basketball players, so there's a lot of athletic talent in the family. Very good hand-eye coordination. Runs routes like a receiver. That's like, on the field, to me, that's his biggest asset, what he can bring for you.
Mm-hmm.
The coaches always talked about how good of a blocker he was. The PFF grades did not necessarily reflect him being a consistently good blocker, but he's willing and he's smart. So those are good starting points in that regard.
And he shows up in crunch moments, even if he's not having the best game. I always think about that Oregon State game in the 2 fourth quarter touchdowns that he had. I don't think Arizona wins that game if he doesn't score those touchdowns.
How about the streak breaker against Cal? There was one touchdown scored in that game.
Oh, was it Michael Wiley?
That was Michael Wiley.
Wow.
Right? So, yeah, and there was a stretch too when they were they'd lose almost every week, right? I mean, it was 20? How many? What was the streak? It was 20
games.
But during that time, he was scoring. He was like, if they got a touchdown, it was usually a Michael Wiley touchdown. Like, he had he had a streak of his own where he was scoring almost every week.
If it wasn't a rushing touchdown, it was a receiving touchdown.
Yeah. So he has a nose for the end zone too, which is another valuable asset. And the coaching staff just absolutely loved him.
Yep.
As a kid, as a leader, Jed Fish would say stuff like, he's everything you want in a college football player. And I don't think that was hyperbole.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that was reality. It's funny when you look at his stats from last year, Justin. How many rushing yards do you think Michael Wiley had in 2023? Off the top of your head,
is it 400 to 500?
It's lower.
Lower than that. Wow.
Yeah, he only had 311 yards rushing.
And about the same.
Wild. He had almost that many in the ASU game alone at the end of the 22 season. And he was banged up a little bit, right, for a while. And Jonah Coleman kind of emerged, but he also had almost as many yards as a receiver, and he had more touchdowns as a receiver, and he averaged 10.9 yards per reception as a receiver last year, which good. I think might have been more than what. Yeah, that was more than Jacob Cowing averaged per catch. Isn't that great? That's
wild.
That makes no sense. Maybe that's a good segue into Jacob.
Yeah.
He ran his official times. I'm looking at the beast here, the draft guide that Dane Brugler puts out for the Athletic. 4.38, 4.38 40. If you're under 4.4, that's big time, right? My concerns with Jacob, I think it's obvious. It's size, right? His official measurements from the combine were 5'8" and 3/8 and 168 pounds. Pro day checked in 5'8" and 5/8 and 171 pounds. So he's a slot receiver.
And my concern with Jacob Cowing with height was, I think he's shorter than he's actually listed at Arizona. Because when he was at Arizona, I think he was like 5'10", 5'11".
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, he is more like on the 5'7" to 5'8"
Yeah. And
side of
it
things.
really only matters what you are in shoes, right?
Sure.
Because they don't play barefoot. But when you're in that 5'8", kind of 170 range, like you have to be special in some other areas. And he has shown at times that he can be.
Yeah.
You know, his senior season or his final season was kind of weird. Like we said, that 9.4 yard average per catch, but he had 13 touchdowns. And he also absolutely like went off the last 2 games of the season. Right? All of a sudden, like we're all like, where are the big plays with Jacob Cowing? Boom, they were there in those last 2 games.
ASU Alamo Bowl just absolutely went off. And I think that Jacob Cowing too, his ability to play special teams will allow him to stick around. If Jacob Cowing wasn't a punt returner, and it wasn't like Jacob Cowing was an elite punt returner last year, but going back to that Oregon State game, we talk about Michael Wiley and his great touchdowns. Well, guess who set up those touchdowns with decent punt returns? It was Jacob Cowing. I think if Jacob Cowing can continue to polish his tools as a punt returner, and continue to be effective in that category, I think Jacob Cowing will be in the NFL for a long, long time. And then eventually he'll get into maybe a scenario in which he can be in a wide receiver rotation.
If I were him, I mean, I would have spent a lot of time this offseason working on that very thing and showing teams that I can be an asset to you in special teams. I can be a punt returner. I'm looking at his game log from last year, Justin. He did not have a 100-yard game until the Territorial Cup. Then he went for 9 and 157. And then in the Alamo Bowl, 7 for 152, including basically the winning touchdown, I guess.
Yeah.
In that game.
Yep.
So certainly capable of that. He was used more as a down the field kind of guy when he was at UTEP, and he kind of got into that Stanley Berryhill role, a lot more underneath stuff, high volume catcher, to be sure. I would like to see him be a little bit better in contested catches. That's an area where, like, Tetero McMillan, that is going to be, he's awesome in that regard, right?
Yeah.
Like using his big body, his hands, he can catch one-handed if need be, as we've seen many, many times. So I think that's an area where Jacob can improve as well. But it's also hard to find 4.38 speed matched with, that volume of production of 316 career catches, 33 touchdowns. So I think day 3 for Jacob, somewhere in that 4th to 6th round range.
And when you look at his stats, 7th most receiving yards in college football history, whether he was at UTEP, whether he was at Arizona, can't deny the man's production. The man was good.
Yeah, that's not nothing.
No doubt. Well, speaking of NFL draft prospects on the offensive side of the ball, we talked about Michael Wiley. We talked about Jordan Morgan. We talked about Jacob Cowing. Now let's briefly talk about Tanner McLachlan, maybe some other prospects that Arizona could send out, and then also get into Pac-12 quarterbacks. Tanner McLachlan is one of my favorite stories in Arizona football history because, and I don't mean to go full Chris Collinsworth here. Here's a guy, but if you want to talk about this, man, talk about his story. This man went from living in Alberta, Canada, comes down to Southern Utah, has a couple decent seasons at SUU, and then decides to transfer to Arizona. But in between his time at Southern Utah and Arizona, he had a ACL injury, and he rehabbed his ACL injury through YouTube. He didn't have access to medical staff, didn't have access to the cool fancy trainers that Arizona has to offer. So in that in-between period, Tanner McLachlan was rehabbing, then got his knee right. And when he joined Arizona, Lev, I was thinking, okay, he might be like a third stringer because, they have Alex Lyons coming back, who is the starter. They have this Kean Burnett guy who's pretty damn good and is the highest rated tight end recruit since Rob Gronkowski to come over. So I think this Tanner McLachlan guy, he might just be, the number 3 tight end or whatever. And then he just slowly but surely just emerges. And then he wins the starting job And not only does he win the starting job, but then he becomes the most productive tight end at Arizona since Rob Gronkowski. One of my favorite stories to come through Arizona, and I can't wait to see where Tanner McLachlan goes. And I really hope he goes to an organization that it has a standard. And speaking of standards, maybe like the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know they have Freiermuth there, but heck, Freiermuth, Tanner McLachlan, throwing some double tight end action. I just hope wherever Tanner McLachlan goes, I just want him to go to a great organization because I think he will have a great NFL career.
You love you some 12 personnel.
It's the
Don't
best.
you, Justin?
It's the best.
Justin loves a 2 tight end formation. Yeah, I think super high character guy. As you mentioned, great story. Definitely some adversity there. Rehabbed his knee on his own by watching YouTube clips on how to do that. 0-star recruit, basically, coming out of Canada, went to Southern Utah, came here as a walk-on, and became honorable mention all Pac-12 player. 45 catches, 528 yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 drops last season. That's pretty good. I don't think he's a great blocker, but again, he's a willing blocker. And I think he can be taught to do that and can at least be adequate in that regard. I don't know if he's ever going to be like a regular NFL starter, but I think he's one of those guys who can be a backup tight end in the NFL for 10 to 12 years. And will have a long and productive career. Guy who plays in 2 tight end packages, goal line packages. Maybe he can sub for an injured starter for a few games. I think he's an underrated athlete. Who doesn't have long arms, but he's got good size, a good frame. He's 6'5". Interestingly, Justin, do you know he's 25 years old?
That's a man.
So, I mean, that can be viewed 2 ways, right? Usually they kind of players who are younger, so maybe you haven't seen the best of them yet. But on the other hand, later in the draft, someone you can just plug him right in. This is our number 2 tight end. This guy's polished. He's ready to go. So again, I see him in that 4 to 6 round range. I think he's going to be picked ahead of Jacob Cowing, personally, just because I think maybe just a little less concern about things like his size or whatnot, which I think is something that's going to hold Jacob back a little bit in this draft. So yeah, very cool story for Tanner. Being that the guy who went from nothing to something, bet on himself, believed in himself, and he was right. He's a pro player.
And I think that's why whatever team is going to pick him, they're going to get one of the most underrated tight ends in the draft because of that. Everything that he's had to fight for. I mean, this is your job now in the NFL. And I think if Tanner continues to have that hunger, he's going to stick for a long, long time. I think NFL scouts and GMs are kind of loving the fact that maybe the pandemic and its influence on college football. And now you're starting to see a bunch of players who are in their mid-20s. The NFL draft is going to have a bunch of NFL ready players. And I'm talking about guys who are in the 5th or 6th round. You could get a 25 to 26-year-old later in the draft.
Men. Yeah, NIL also has had an influence on the draft. The number of undergrads who filed for the draft this year was 58, and a couple of years ago it was 130. So guys are sticking around longer, and we will talk about a few of those guys in a little bit when we discuss the Pac-12 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
They're sticking around because they can make money in college, and if you're not a surefire first-round pick, maybe it makes sense to stay a little bit longer and cash in, and maybe in the process you can improve your draft stock a little bit too.
Before we talk about those guys, out of all the guys that we didn't mention who are coming out of Arizona, who do you think will have an NFL career or at least a cup of coffee?
I think Taylor Upshaw is one who's worth mentioning. The transfer defensive end from Michigan, highly productive this past year. Led the team in sacks. He has good size at about 6'4", 250 or so. He's one of those guys to me, nothing, he doesn't do anything exceptional, but he does everything well. Like he's pretty good against the run. He can rush the passer. He's got adequate size. He's got a football background, right? With his dad, Reagan Upshaw, having been an NFL player. So everyone's always looking for pass rushers. I think he'll be a priority free agent for someone. And then the other guy I would like to mention is Seth McKellar, the long snapper, who's just an absolutely superb snapper at Arizona. Never had a bad snap pretty much his entire career, that's the job. Like, you had one job, right? And he did that one job exceptionally well. The one concern with Seth is that he's on the smaller side. He's sub 6 feet, doesn't have long arms. And even though you can't like smash into the snapper, there are still like blocking responsibilities that you have. So he's fighting a bit of an uphill battle in that regard. And that's another spot too, where there's 32 of those in the world.
Yeah.
Right. There's 32 punters, there's 32 kickers, and there's 32 snappers. And no one has any backups on their team. So it's going to be hard for him to make a roster, but I certainly hope he gets signed and gets a chance, that he gets into a camp and he can impress somebody.
Man, all these names were thrown out there of guys who could conceivably go to an NFL team. It's pretty cool.
And look, man, you don't have to be drafted either to make it in the league. Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles is a great example of that. Someone who was undrafted. The 49ers really liked him. They saw him as someone who could become like a will linebacker in the league after being a safety in college. The way the sport is headed now, or has been headed for a while, like you don't have to be quite as big. They want more athletic guys in that position. And he's on a second or third contract. He's been in the league for several years, played in the Super Bowl. Great story.
Mm-hmm. All right, Lev, before we get out of here, Pac-12 prospects. So I think it's safe to say that number one overall going to Chi-Town is Caleb Williams, who is the best quarterback in the draft.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I'm a huge Caleb Williams fan.
Huge.
I love the way he plays. I think there's a lot of Patrick Mahomes in his game. I know people are maybe weirded out by kind of his personality, but he's someone who cares a lot. I think that just shines through. He wears his heart on his sleeve. I just never seen anyone who can throw the ball like he can.
Yeah.
Like never.
Never, not any prospect ever in NFL history or football history.
I mean, if you want to go like all the way back to like John Elway, like before you were born. But in terms of just sheer arm talent, and arm talent's not everything. I mean, this isn't just like, oh, he can, from his knees, he can throw the ball 70 yards and hit the goalpost. Like, he makes plays on the run, running to his left, running to his right, throwing these absolute darts down the field. The velocity, the arm angles. And he makes a lot of off-script plays, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. But when you watch Patrick Mahomes, like, how often he's improvising a lot, right? It's not all in structure. And I also think he's going to go to a pretty good situation. The Bears were not the worst team in the NFL last year. They happened to have the Carolina Panthers first round pick, a heist of a trade from the previous year. So they end up, their own pick is number 9. They're in pretty good shape roster wise relative to other teams that have the first pick. So very bullish on Caleb Williams. I think even if he's 75% of what people think he can be, he could go down as the best quarterback in Bears history. It is not a very, illustrious list.
Is Jay Cutler the best?
That position? Like, statistically, yes. I mean, you have to go back to like,
Jim McMahon,
to like the 50s, to find anybody who's ever any good.
Okay.
Like Jim McMahon he was fine, but I mean, that team was built on defense, right? The running game. So, I mean, there really have not been great quarterbacks. Sid Luckman is maybe the best quarterback in Bears history. He played in like the 50s, so it's a low bar to clear.
I also love Caleb Williams's confidence. Like, he's not the most like rah guy. I'm going to pump you up and amp you up. But like, there's just this level of swagger and confidence that oozes out of him. I was watching him on the Pivot podcast, and he was talking with Ryan Clark about why he chose to go to Oklahoma. And he went because Lincoln Riley was the best of the best when it comes to developing quarterbacks. And he really thought that he could beat out Spencer Rattler for the job, like as a freshman.
And remember, Spencer Rattler was
at that time
huge recruit who had a pretty good start to his college career.
Yeah.
He wasn't just some scrub.
Yeah. And like at that time, Spencer Rattler was viewed as maybe a first round pick. And Caleb Williams told Ryan Clark, like, I really thought going into it, I was going to beat this guy. I even told the people in my circle, I'm going to go in, I'm going to beat out this guy. So that's the kind of confidence that he has, and that you'd want from your quarterback. That, yes, is he arrogant? No, but he truly believes his skill set and the way he plays is the best of the best. And I agree with him, man. And I can't wait to see him as an NFL quarterback. But outside of Caleb Williams, right, we get into other quarterbacks like Drake May from North Carolina, but like just guys.
A lot of Pac-12 flavor here.
A lot of Pac-12 guys.
Next group, yeah.
Bo Nix, you got Michael Penix. Like, honestly, Lev, to me, I think that Michael Penix is the second best quarterback of this year's draft. And I think whoever picks him in the late first round, they're going to get an absolute steal. Like, if Penix goes to a situation in which the team is already kind of playoff ready, like, look out. Michael Penix could have a great NFL career. And people are concerned with his injuries, but they're talking about like, oh, but the injuries that happened at Indiana. But I'm like, but he didn't get injured at Washington, right? So I don't understand why injuries from years back are all of a sudden the biggest knock on the guy.
Yeah, I mean, look, they dissect these players literally from head to toe, right? And every little thing is a concern. And he had a couple of shoulder injuries, he's had a couple of knee injuries. So you wonder, like, does he have, like, is he someone who's going to be injured all the time? So that's a worry. When you watched Michael Penix in the college football playoff last year, like, you saw the best and the worst versions of him, right? Like, he was unbelievably good in the semifinals, right? Like, you were like, oh my God, this guy's incredible. He's a top 10 pick. Then you saw against Michigan, he was under pressure a lot more. The offensive line didn't hold up as well, and he struggled. Like, his ball placement wasn't nearly as good. And he looked vulnerable in that situation. I love the way he just is able to just whip the ball down the field. It reminds me a lot of Michael Vick back in the day, another left-handed quarterback who just, like, it took like no effort for him to just fire the ball like 50 yards down the field. I love that he's kind of he's a gunslinger in some regards, but he also, like, doesn't throw a ton of picks. He'll throw the ball away. I think he's an underrated athlete. I mean, he ran 4.58 in the 40. That's pretty good. Most likely he's going to go, I think, in the back end of the first round. I think someone will trade up into those last 6 or so picks. Because, as I mentioned earlier, you want to get, if you're going to take a quarterback, the way the CBA set up now, you want to get them at the end of the first round, because then you have the 5th-year contract, 5th-year option with the first-round picks, and that gives ownership more control, over their salary. It pushes them 1 more year out from free agency. But I really like Michael Penix. Like, I agree with you. I don't know if he's the second best quarterback in this draft, but I do think he's an NFL player, someone who can be a starter in the league for a long time.
Mel Kiper has Michael Penix as a second rounder, going number 37 to the LA Rams.
Yeah, like, I think he is, like, I think talent-wise, he probably is a second rounder. I just think he'll be drafted at the end of the first round because of the economics of it and just the way things work with quarterbacks.
What about Jaden Daniels, the defending Heisman Trophy winner? And I know he's not a Pac-12 guy, right? When he says
he was
when he says his name on Sunday Night Football, he's going to say Jaden Daniels LSU, not Jaden Daniels ASU. But Jaden is currently on Mel Kiper's board as a number 2 pick to the Washington Commanders. I'm interested to see his NFL career. kind of, unfold? Because is Jaden Daniels a legit prospect, or did he just have a good year and a half at LSU?
Well, he's improved a lot since his ASU days, right?
Doesn't throw a lot
His
of picks.
his last year at ASU, he had a 10-10 TD to INT ratio. The next year at LSU, 17-3. Last year, 40-4.
Yeah.
And you're talking about playing in the SEC, right? I mean, you're not playing. This is not like a Mountain West schedule here.
You're not playing the
Right? Like,
Citadel.
exactly. This is the best of the best in college football. So really impressive. He's unbelievable at throwing the ball down the field. Like, I think he had 22 touchdowns on passes thrown 20 or more yards downfield. We know firsthand from watching him face Arizona how good of an athlete he is. Like, he is a really good runner. Something that concerns me about him, though, is he's kind of fearless to a fault. Like, he's not someone who slides, who does a good job of protecting himself. And he's gotten his weight up to about 210 pounds, but he's still relatively slight.
Yeah.
In terms of his build. Like, that was a knock on Tom Brady when he came out, but Tom Brady was a pocket passer who's just going to get rid of the ball on time, like before the rush gets there. I'm a little worried about Jaden Daniels running a la Justin Fields, but not having Justin Fields' big, strong body and getting banged up in those situations. But you do like the improvement that he showed, the downfield touch that he showed. I think, Justin, just to put this out there, not based on any intel, just everything, just reading the tea leaves, I think he'll be the third pick in the draft. I think Drake May is actually, there's been a lot of, for whatever reason, people disparaging Drake May. I think at the end of the day, he's going to end up being number 2. And Jaden Daniels will be number 3, going to the Patriots.
So explain to me the Drake May hype. I think he's a good quarterback, but
okay. Size.
I'm getting Mitchell Trubisky all over again.
I mean, better size, better athleticism, better feel for the game. I think the knocks on him are more sort of like footwork oriented, like sometimes the ball just doesn't get where it's supposed to go because his feet aren't right. And that's something you can coach, like the intangibles, the feel for the game, all that stuff. You can't coach that. And he has those things. So I think that's those are the reasons that people like him. His stats fell off his final year, but he also lost some really good receivers to the NFL off that previous year's team. So that's a reason for that. He was asked to carry his team too, which to me, like, that can be viewed as a positive. I'm not saying that he's Josh Allen, but I think he might be a poor man's Josh Allen.
Okay.
Better athlete than people think. And I think those are some of the reasons. Plus, like I said, the concerns about Jaden, his long-term endurance. I think Drake May is going to go ahead of him for those reasons.
All right, Lev, before we get out of here,
we got one more. Wait, we got one more. We got Bo Nix.
Bo Nix. Oh, from Oregon. How could we forget about Bo?
There's so many good quarterbacks out of the Pac-12 this last year.
Man.
What do you think of Bo Nix? That, like, sort of Bo Nix 2.0 at Oregon.
I loved it. I love Bo Nix. To me, he just screams Denver Bronco. I don't know why when I look at him, I'm like, that
Sean
is
Payton kind of quarterback. Yeah.
Bo the Bronco going to play for Sean Payton. It just makes way too much sense.
I could see him playing for him or for the Vikings as the successor to Kirk Cousins.
Okay.
Someone who's going to execute the plays that are called.
Yeah. And I think that Bo stepped up in all of Oregon's big games, right? I know that they lost to Washington, and I know, that hurt, but Bo looked impressive in every single game for Oregon this year. It wasn't like Oregon lost to Washington because, Bo Nix sucked or, Washington was just head and shoulders the best team. They were right there with each other. It's just Washington, it was just their year with their defense, with all the great offensive players that they had. But I think that Bo Nix, a lot of people were concerned with, I guess, his physical traits. Can that translate to the NFL? And I think it can. Sure, he's a little bit undersized, but sneaky athletic, can run, I love when he's able to use his legs. Can be a little reckless at times, but I think for the most part, Bo Nix is as solid as it gets. And I could see him probably being a top 15 pick in the draft.
Middle of the first round. Yeah. He had a 45-3 touchdown to interception ratio last year.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Pretty good.
Here are his career completion percentages by year. Okay. 57.6, 59.9, 61.0, 71.9, 77.4. Got better every single year. So I think the way that the NFL is now, the way the quarterback market is now, he's going to be a first rounder.
Yeah.
And
I think he's a better quarterback
middle
than
of the
JJ
first
McCarthy.
rounder. Yeah.
Better than McCarthy?
Ooh. I have a really difficult time assessing JJ McCarthy because even though Michigan was on TV all the time and played in all these big games, they just asked so little of him. You know?
Hey, just exist in these 2 seconds to hand off the ball.
I mean, seriously, like I think it was the Penn State game. No, they just didn't throw a pass like the entire second half of the game, I believe.
Yeah.
He's just handing the ball off. But yeah, I don't know. NFL people love him. They say he's got all the traits. They say he's got all the intangibles, the leadership skills. He did produce when asked to, and he also played in what would be considered a pro-style system at Michigan. So a lot of the throws that he made are translatable to the NFL.
When you say NFL people, are you talking about one person, and that's Jim Harbaugh?
Well, you know what? All right, you're a Chargers fan, of course.
Yeah.
The Chargers are in a great spot in this draft, picking number 5 in a quarterback-rich draft where they don't need a quarterback. So it is to Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers' benefit for him to talk up JJ McCarthy at every turn, right? To get someone to maybe jump ahead of the Chargers to take him at number 4, or maybe give a boatload of picks to the Chargers at number 5 to get JJ McCarthy. And the Chargers end up winning at the end of the day because they get a bunch of assets and they don't need a quarterback.
They do need a receiver.
Yep.
Do you
honestly think that Jim Harbaugh is going to take a wide receiver in the first round of this draft?
I don't think he wants to, but maybe it's not up to him. Because if you have Roman Dunze on the board, because I think Marvin Harrison Jr.
I get it. Yeah. Or Malik Neighbors. Either way. I don't know. I could see them trading down maybe with the Vikings or with 12 or 11. Vikings come up to get their quarterback. Jim Harbaugh takes an offensive lineman.
Now, who is that offensive
lineman? Because he's Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, this kind of leads into my next or last segment before we get out of here. We talked about the great Pac-12 quarterbacks, but what about just Pac-12 prospects, period? Who do you like in that first round? And I love Fuaga from Oregon State, the offensive lineman.
Yeah, I was going to mention, Fuaga is a really good one from Troy Fautanu of Washington is another one who's projected to be a first rounder. I thought the Pac-12 could produce offensive linemen. Justin, wasn't that a thing?
Who said that?
Many people have said that. Right? Tulise Fuaga, according to Dane Brugler's big board, is number 17 overall. Someone who conceivably could play right tackle or guard. He's got Troy Fautanu, number 9, out of Washington. So there's a couple offensive linemen who could be in that range for the Chargers. I'm a huge fan of Rome Odunze.
Me too.
He's just like kind of the complete package. You know, like it always shocked me. Like every time I would see his name flash on the screen or they'd show sort of his bio or whatever. He's big. Like he measured at almost 6'3" and 212 pounds. And he like kind of plays like someone who's faster and quicker than that. Like I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like he can do everything. You know, he can catch the ball downfield. He can catch back shoulders. He can make contested catches on third down situations. I'm a big fan. great all-around receiver. I think like high, maybe his ceiling isn't as high as Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbors, but I think the floor is very high. Like you're going to get an NFL starter for 8 to 10 years.
And if he goes to the Chicago Bears at number 9 overall,
oh man, wow,
with Caleb Williams, and they have Keenan Allen as well that they just got from the Chargers. Like, look out!
They have DJ Moore. They have DJ Moore also.
Yeah,
that's
Bears
a
are
nice
up to
group.
something.
Yeah.
All right, plenty of draft coverage coming your way all throughout the week. First round starting on Thursday, and then rounds 2 through 3 will be on Friday, and then Saturday morning / afternoon you'll see rounds 4 through 7 from Detroit. We all know Caleb Williams is going number 1 overall to the Chicago Bears, but where is Jordan Morgan going? That'll be the question everyone's asking. Late first round, early second round, and we'll have all the coverage on Tucson.com and the Wildcaster app. Plus, we'll also have spring football coverage as well. The spring game on Saturday. The rest of the spring practices will have coverage as well. Arizona baseball, Arizona softball, Roadrunners.
We will most definitely do a podcast wrapping up spring practice.
Yes.
Sometime after Saturday.
Yes, sir.
And hopefully we can get some of our listeners involved in that through social media. If they get some questions into us, we'll get that all set up and try to answer all of your queries about U of A football heading out of spring and into the summer.
Heck yeah. Exciting times ahead. Check us out on Tucson.com, Wildcaster app. We'll be back next week. For Michael Lev, I'm Justin Spears. Thank you for watching and listening.